I'm Heather, 26 female. I live in a small but comfortable apartment downtown, the kind of place you get when you spend more time analyzing spreadsheets than socializing. As a data analyst, my life revolves around finding patterns in chaos, a skill I never thought I'd have to apply to my own family. For years, I was the quiet variable in our family equation, the one who didn't quite fit the perfect picture my parents, Thomas and Sophia, tried to paint. This is the story of how I found out that the picture wasn't just imperfect, it was a forgery. It's about how a car accident, a hospital bed, and a single, hateful social media post from my brother, Jasper, became the catalyst that exposed a secret my parents had buried for nearly 3 decades, forcing me to decide what the word, family, really means. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up, my family felt like a carefully curated exhibit. My father, Thomas, was the stoic architect, a man who designed beautiful, sturdy buildings but could never quite construct a warm home. My mother, Sophia, was an art gallery curator, a woman who appreciated aesthetics and appearances above all else. Together, they presented a flawless image to the world, successful, cultured, and perfectly matched. And then there were the children, my brother, Jasper, and me. Jasper was their masterpiece. 2 years older than me, he was charismatic, handsome, and effortlessly confident. He excelled in sports, charmed every adult he met, and coasted through school on a wave of natural talent and social grace. He was the son every parent dreamed of, and mine were no exception. They doted on him, celebrated his every minor victory as if he'd won a Nobel Prize, and poured their resources into his future. He was now a successful real estate agent, his face plastered on bus benches with a smile that was just a little too wide to be genuine. He was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets orbiting him, reflecting his light. I, on the other hand, was the afterthought. The quiet, analytical child who preferred books to parties and code to conversation. My achievements were met with polite nods, my interests dismissed as phases. When I graduated top of my class in data science, my father patted me on the shoulder and said, "That's nice, Heather. Maybe you can help Jasper with his business finances." My mother would sigh and suggest I try a new hairstyle or a brighter shade of lipstick, as if my primary failing was an aesthetic one she could correct. They didn't dislike me, they just didn't seem to see me. I was a part of the collection that didn't quite match the decor. This dynamic created a chasm between Jasper and me. He saw our parents' blatant favoritism not as an injustice, but as the natural order of things. He treated me with a casual disdain that bordered on cruelty. To him, I was the boring, socially awkward little sister who was a drag on the family's image. He'd forget to invite me to gatherings with his friends, make snide remarks about my job in front of our parents, and mock my quiet nature. "Lighten up, Heather," he'd say, rolling his eyes. "Not everything is a math problem." Our parents, of course, never intervened. They'd either laugh it off as sibling rivalry or simply not notice, their focus always locked on Jasper. I learned early on that fighting back was pointless. It only resulted in my mother telling me to be less sensitive and my father retreating into the silence of his study. So, I adapted. I built my own life away from them. I found a job I loved, an apartment that was my sanctuary, and a close friend, Lauren, who became the family I chose. Lauren was my opposite in many ways. A vibrant graphic designer with a loud laugh and an even louder wardrobe, she saw the world in colors while I saw it in numbers. She was the only one who understood the strange, cold dynamic of my family. "It's not you, Heather," she'd tell me over coffee. "It's them. They're living in a bubble, and Jasper is the only one they let breathe the air." She was right, but that didn't make it hurt any less. The week before the accident, we had a family dinner. It was to celebrate Jasper closing a big real estate deal. The entire evening was a performance. My mother gushed about his killer instinct, and my father beamed with pride, raising his glass to my son, the dealmaker. I had recently been given a major promotion at work, leading a new data analytics team. When I tried to mention it, my mother cut me off mid-sentence to ask Jasper if his new suit was Italian silk. Jasper just smirked at me from across the table, a look that said, "See? You don't matter." I remember sitting there, stirring my soup, feeling utterly invisible. It was a familiar feeling, a dull ache I had carried for as long as I could remember. My father caught my eye for a fleeting moment, and for a second I thought I saw a flicker of something, guilt perhaps. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by his usual placid, unreadable expression as he turned his attention back to his son. It was in that moment that I realized the cracks in our family portrait weren't just on the surface. The entire canvas was rotten. I was a part of a family that didn't value me, a daughter who was merely a placeholder. I didn't know then just how true that was, or how a violent twist of fate was about to shatter the entire illusion for good. The rain was relentless that Tuesday evening, turning the city streets into a slick, black mirror reflecting distorted neon lights. I was driving home from work, my mind still churning through lines of code from a project I was leading. The promotion was a huge step for me, a validation of my skills that I couldn't get at home, and I was determined to prove myself. I was stopped at a red light, humming along to some indie band on the radio, when it happened. I only saw the headlights for a split second, a blinding glare in my rearview mirror. The sound was a deafening crunch of metal and shattering glass, a percussive explosion that seemed to happen in slow motion and all at once. My car lurched forward, propelled by the force of the truck that had failed to stop. My head snapped back against the headrest, then forward, my forehead colliding with the steering wheel. The world went fuzzy, a chaotic symphony of a blaring horn, the hiss of a deployed airbag, and the sharp, coppery taste of blood in my mouth. Then, darkness. I woke up to the sterile, antiseptic smell of a hospital. A rhythmic beeping from a machine beside me was the only sound in the dimly lit room. My head throbbed with a dull, persistent pain, and a sharp ache radiated from my ribs with every breath. A nurse with kind eyes checked my vitals and explained what had happened. I had a severe concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and a constellation of deep bruises painting my body in shades of purple and blue. The driver of the truck had been texting. "I was lucky," she said. "It could have been much worse." Lying there, tethered to an IV drip, my first instinct was to call my family. Despite everything, they were still my emergency contact. My phone had been shattered in the crash, so I asked the nurse if I could use the hospital phone. I called my father first. It went straight to voicemail. "Hi, Dad, it's Heather. I was in an accident. I'm at City General Hospital. I'm okay, but please call me." My voice was hoarse and shaky. I called my mother next. Same result. Voicemail. Finally, I tried Jasper. He actually answered. "What?" he said, his voice impatient. He was clearly out somewhere, the background noise a mix of loud music and chatter. "Jasper, it's me," I said, wincing as a sharp pain shot through my side. "I'm in the hospital. I was in a car accident." There was a pause. "Seriously, are you okay?" He didn't sound concerned, more annoyed, as if my emergency was an inconvenience. "I have a concussion and some broken ribs, but the doctors say I'll be all right. I'm at City General, room 304. "Wow, that's rough," he said, his tone distracted. "Look, I'm in the middle of a client dinner. Big deal, you know how it is. Mom and Dad are at a gallery opening tonight. I'll let them know when I can." Can you just tell them to call me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Yeah, sure, gotta go," and he hung up. I lay back against the stiff pillow, the silence of the room pressing in on me. I told myself they were busy. My father's work, my mother's events, Jasper's clients, they always had something more important. But as the hours bled into a long, lonely night, a cold dread began to seep into my bones. No one called. Not that night, not the next morning. The first day was a blur of doctors, nurses, and pain medication. I borrowed a charger from a friendly orderly and managed to power on my old tablet from my work bag, which had miraculously survived. I logged into my social media, thinking I'd find a concerned message, a missed call notification, something. There was nothing. What I did find, however, stopped my breath. Jasper had posted a photo. It was a selfie of him, my mother, and my father, all smiling broadly at a fancy restaurant. My mother was holding up a glass of champagne. My father had his arm around Jasper, beaming with pride. They looked happy, carefree. The photo had been posted last night, around the same time I was being pulled from the wreckage of my car. The caption he wrote underneath, it felt like a punch to my already bruised ribs. Finally, a peaceful family dinner. Sometimes it's nice to have some peace and quiet without the constant negativity. Family first, good vibes only. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring, without the constant negativity. He was talking about me, while I was lying in a hospital bed, alone and terrified. They were out celebrating my absence. They weren't just busy, they had known I wouldn't be there and were happy about it. The post was a public declaration of my worthlessness to them. My brother, my own flesh and blood, had broadcast his contempt for the world to see. I spent 3 nights in that hospital. 3 nights staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic beeps of the heart monitor, feeling the cold, hard truth solidify in my chest. My friend Lauren came as soon as she heard, bringing magazines, snacks, and a righteous fury that I was too numb to feel myself. "I will burn his entire real estate empire to the ground," she seethed, scrolling through the comments on Jasper's post. Most were from his sycophantic friends, praising their perfect family. But my family, they never came, they never called. I was discharged on Friday morning, sore, bandaged, and feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. A taxi took me back to my empty apartment. The silence inside was a reflection of the silence from them. I didn't reach out. I didn't call or text to ask why. What was the point? They had given me their answer in a smiling photograph and a cruel hashtag. I was nothing to them. And in the quiet of my apartment, nursing my cracked ribs and a shattered heart, I finally began to accept it. The week that followed my discharge from the hospital was a strange, suspended period of existence. My body was a roadmap of pain. Every movement was a negotiation with my bruised muscles and cracked ribs. My company was incredibly understanding, insisting I take all the time I needed to recover. So I spent my days in a haze of painkillers and Netflix binges, cocooned in the quiet solitude of my apartment. Lauren was my lifeline, checking in daily, bringing groceries, and filling the silence with her warmth and outrage on my behalf. Of my family, there was nothing. A week of absolute, deafening silence. I didn't expect an apology, not from Jasper, but I thought maybe my mother would call out of a sense of maternal duty or my father out of sheer propriety. But the days passed, and my phone remained quiet. It was a confirmation of what Jasper's post had already told me. I was not a priority. I was not even a thought. The hurt was a deep, cold stone in my gut, but with each passing day, it began to feel less like a wound and more like a foundation. A foundation for a life without them. I was starting to make peace with it. I was starting to feel free. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was exactly 1 week after the accident. I woke up late, the sunlight streaming through my window. My head was clearer than it had been in days, the throbbing finally subsided to a dull ache. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and my eyes widened. The screen was lit up with notifications. 53 missed calls, all from my father. They had started around 2 a.m. and continued relentlessly every few minutes until dawn. Interspersed were over a dozen frantic texts. "Heather, please pick up. I need to talk to you. It's urgent. This is a mistake, all of it. Heather, please, I'm begging you." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was completely out of character for my father. Thomas was a man of few words and even fewer displays of emotion. He was the king of stoic silence. 53 missed calls was more communication than I'd received from him in the past 5 years combined. A wave of panic washed over me. Had something happened to my mother? To Jasper? Then I saw the last message, the one that had arrived just as I was waking up. It was longer. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The words on the screen seemed to rearrange themselves, twisting into something nonsensical, something impossible. It read, "Your brother isn't mine. Your mother betrayed me a long time ago. I just found out. The whole thing was a lie. Jasper is not my son. I need my real daughter. I need you, Heather." I read it once, then twice. Then a third time. The words remained the same, stark and unbelievable against the white background of the messaging app. Jasper is not my son. The sentence echoed in the silent room, a detonation that sent shockwaves through the entire structure of my life, my identity, my past. Every memory I had, every family dinner, every holiday, every moment of blatant favoritism was instantly recontextualized. The way my father's pride in Jasper always seemed a little forced, a little performative. The way my mother would defend Jasper with a ferocity that went beyond simple maternal love, as if she were protecting a fragile secret. The way my father would sometimes look at me with that strange, distant sadness in his eyes. It wasn't disappointment I had seen, it was something else entirely. Something I now understood. He wasn't looking at the daughter, who wasn't enough. He was looking at the only thing in his life that was real. The pieces clicked into place, with the sickening finale. Tie of a lock. The favoritism wasn't just my parents preferring a son over a daughter, or an extrovert over an introvert. It was my mother, Sophia, overcompensating for a monumental betrayal, showering Jasper with love and attention to validate his place in the family, to cement the lie. And it was my father, unknowingly raising another man's child, pouring his pride into a boy who wasn't his, while his actual child, his only biological child, sat quietly in the shadows, overlooked. I just sat there on the edge of my bed, staring at the screen. The physical pain from my injuries was completely gone, replaced by a dizzying, hollow numbness. My brother wasn't my brother. My father wasn't his father. My mother had built our entire family on a foundation of deceit. The perfect family portrait wasn't just cracked, it was a lie from the very beginning. The phone started ringing again, my father's name flashing on the screen. I silenced it, my hand moving automatically. 53 missed calls. He was a broken man, his world shattered by the same woman who had allowed me to feel invisible my entire life. I need my real daughter. The words were a desperate plea from a man I barely knew, a man who had stood by silently for 26 years while I was treated like a second-class citizen in his home. Now his lie had crumbled, and he was turning to me. The irony was so bitter it made me want to laugh. He hadn't visited me in the hospital. He hadn't called to see if I was alive. He only needed his real daughter when his fake son was exposed. I didn't feel pity, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. All I felt was a profound, chilling clarity. They had all made their choices for decades. And now, for the first time in my life, I had a choice to make too. I looked at the phone, at my father's desperate message, and I knew one thing for certain. I would not be the bandage for a wound I didn't create. My journey was just beginning. The days following my father's text message were like living in a fog. His calls and texts continued, a relentless barrage of desperation and regret. I ignored them all, putting my phone on silent and letting the voicemails pile up, each one a testament to a man whose world was collapsing. I needed space. I needed to think. My entire life had been a lie, and I felt like a stranger in my own skin. My analytical mind, the part of me my family had always dismissed, kicked into overdrive. I couldn't just accept this reality, I had to understand it. I had to find the data points, the evidence that had been hiding in plain sight for 26 years. My father's message was the bombshell, but the clues to the bomb's existence must have been there all along. My grief and confusion slowly hardened into a cold, methodical resolve. I was going to investigate my own life. My first call was to Lauren. I met her at our favorite quiet cafe, my body still aching but my mind sharp. I showed her the text. Her jaw dropped. She read it 3 times, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Heather, oh my God," she whispered, "this is insane." "Tell me about it," I said, sipping my tea. "But it also makes a terrifying amount of sense." "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. "I'm going to find the truth," I replied. "All of it." Lauren, ever the loyal friend, immediately became my co-conspirator. Her graphic design skills, it turned out, were surprisingly useful. She was a master at digital archiving and could spot visual inconsistencies a mile away. Our first target was the family photo albums, the carefully curated chronicles of our happy family. My parents kept them in the large bookshelf in the study of their, of my father's house. Getting in was easier than I expected. I still had a key. I waited until I knew my father would be at his firm and my mother would be at the gallery. Jasper, I knew, rarely visited unless he needed money or an audience. The house was silent when I let myself in, a grand, empty museum of a life I no longer recognized. It felt strange and alien, the air thick with unspoken secrets. Lauren and I went straight to the study. We pulled out album after album, spanning from my parents' wedding to the present day. We laid them out on the large oak desk, and I began to see the patterns I had been trained to find. In the early photos, from their wedding and first few years of marriage, my parents looked genuinely happy, their smiles reaching their eyes. Then, about a year before Jasper was born, the photos became more staged. My mother's smile became a little tighter, my father's a little more distant. Then came Jasper's baby photos. My mother, Sophia, was glowing, but in a possessive, almost desperate way. She was always holding him, clutching him to her chest. My father, Thomas, looked awkward. He held his supposed firstborn son like he was a fragile, foreign object. When I was born 2 years later, the difference was subtle but stark. In photos with me, my father looked more relaxed, more natural. There was a photo of him asleep in a chair, holding me as a newborn, his face peaceful. I'd never seen a photo of him looking that serene with Jasper. Lauren pointed something out. "Look at the dates," she said, tapping a photo from the year before Jasper's birth. "Your mom went on a solo trip to Italy for artistic inspiration for 6 weeks. There are no photos from that trip, not a single one." It was true, a 6-week gap in the family history. My mother was an obsessive documentarian. It made no sense. The real breakthrough came when I found a small, unassuming box tucked away at the back of my father's closet. It was filled with old letters, financial statements, and documents. My hands trembled as I sifted through them. And then I found it, a letter from my mother to a friend, dated shortly after she returned from that trip to Italy. I recognized the letterhead of the hotel she had supposedly stayed at. Her words, written in her elegant, looping cursive, made my blood run cold. She wrote about a passionate affair with an artist she met in Florence, a man named Marco. She described him in breathless detail, calling him her soulmate. And then, the final paragraph. "I'm back with Thomas now, and I must play the part. But I carry a piece of Florence with me, a secret gift that will bind me to Marco forever. Thomas will never know. He will raise this child as his own, and I will have my security with him and my heart with another." The letter was a confession, a cold, calculated plan. She hadn't just had an affair, she had premeditated the entire deception. She had knowingly passed off another man's child as my father's, condemning him to a life of ignorance and me to a childhood in the shadow of her lie. Jasper wasn't just the product of an affair, he was the living embodiment of my mother's contempt for my father. We found more. Financial records showing large, unexplained cash withdrawals my mother had made every year around the same time. Were they for blackmail? Or gifts to her long-lost lover? We found old journals of my father's, filled with entries expressing a vague sense of disconnection from Jasper, anxieties he couldn't name about their lack of a bond, which he always blamed on himself, on his own emotional shortcomings. The evidence was overwhelming, a mountain of deceit that had been meticulously hidden for nearly 30 years. I sat on the floor of my father's study, the letter in my hand, feeling the last vestiges of my childhood innocence crumble to dust. The favoritism, the neglect, the coldness, it all stemmed from this single, selfish act. My mother had protected Jasper so fiercely because he was the key to her secret. My father had been distant because, on some subconscious level, he knew something was wrong. And I was the collateral damage. As Lauren and I packed everything up, making copies of the most damning evidence, a new feeling began to replace the numbness, a slow-burning, icy rage. My mother had stolen my father's life. She had stolen my brother's identity. And she had stolen my family. My father's desperate texts suddenly made sense. He hadn't just found out about an affair, he had discovered that his entire life was a lie. He didn't know how to fix it, so he reached for the only thing he knew was real, me. But he was mistaken if he thought I was going to be the one to clean up my mother's mess. I wasn't the janitor for their broken marriage. I was a data analyst, and I had just found the truth. Now, I had to decide what to do with it. The rage I felt after leaving my parents' house didn't manifest as a fiery explosion. It was cold, quiet, and precise. It settled deep within me, not as a desire for petty revenge, but as an absolute necessity for justice. For decades, my mother, Sophia, had controlled the narrative, manipulating everyone around her to protect her secret. My father, Thomas, had been a passive participant, his silence enabling the toxic environment. And Jasper had thrived in it, becoming the arrogant, entitled man he was today. They had built their lives on a foundation of lies, and I was about to become the architect of my own truth. My plan wasn't about screaming or dramatic confrontations, at least not at first. It was about systematically dismantling the false reality they lived in and taking back control of my own life, piece by piece. As a data analyst, I knew the power of information. The evidence I had, the letter, the financial records, my father's journals, was my leverage. But before I could use it, I had to secure my own foundation. My first step was financial independence. I had always been careful with money, but I knew my parents held certain things over my head, like my name being on a shared family phone plan and a small emergency fund they had set up for me when I went to college, which they could access. I spent the next 2 weeks methodically severing every financial tie. I opened a new bank account at a different institution and transferred all my savings. I got my own phone plan. I reviewed my employment contract and benefits, ensuring my emergency contacts were updated to list only Lauren. Each step was small, but with each one, I felt a chain breaking. I was building a fortress around myself where they could no longer reach me. During this time, my father's calls and texts evolved from desperate to pleading and finally to angry. "Why are you ignoring me, Heather? After everything I've just learned, I need my daughter. Don't you care?" His self-pity was astounding. He still saw this as something that had happened to him, and I was a resource he was entitled to. He didn't once ask how I was feeling after the accident or how this news might have affected me. His pain had made him selfish, just as my mother's lies had. My second step was to secure legal counsel. I found a highly recommended family law attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davis. I laid out the entire story for her, presenting the evidence I had collected. She listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she looked at the copies of the letter and the financial statements. "This is a case of significant fraud," she said, her voice calm and firm. "Your father has grounds for a divorce that would be financially devastating for your mother. The deception regarding paternity is a massive factor. What is it that you want, Heather?" "I want to be free of them," I said simply. "But I also want justice for my father, even if he doesn't deserve it from me. Most of all, I don't want my mother to get away with this. She built her entire comfortable life on this lie." Ms. Davis nodded. "There are ways to ensure that. The first step is to control the narrative." Together, we drafted a plan. It wasn't about public humiliation, but about a controlled demolition. The target was the source of the rot, my mother. My father was a victim, yes, but his neglect of me was a separate issue I would deal with later. Jasper was a symptom of the disease, an arrogant fool who was about to have the rug pulled out from under him. The real culprit was Sophia. My third step, and the most difficult, was to understand the other side of the story, the biological one. Who was Marco, the artist from Florence? It took me weeks of deep diving online, using the scant details from my mother's letter. I cross-referenced artist directories from that year, searched social media, and went down countless rabbit holes. Finally, I found him, Marco Rinaldi. He was a moderately successful painter, now living in Montreal. He had a family, a wife and 2 daughters. He had no idea he had a son. My fourth and final step was to prepare for the confrontation. I decided it wouldn't be a family meeting. That would devolve into chaos, with my mother denying everything and Jasper defending her. No, this needed to be precise. I would approach each of them separately. I would start with my father. He deserved to know that I had the full truth, not just the part my mother had fed him. Then, I would deal with Jasper. And finally, my mother. I spent a month meticulously preparing. I organized the evidence into separate folders for each person. I rehearsed what I would say, stripping the emotion from my voice until it was calm, factual, and unshakable. I was no longer the quiet, overlooked daughter. I was a woman in control of the facts, and the facts were devastating. One evening, Lauren came over with pizza. She watched me as I worked at my dining table, sorting documents. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked gently. "This is going to blow up everything." I looked up from a bank statement, my eyes meeting hers. "Everything was already blown up," I said, my voice steady. "They just didn't know it yet. They built a house on unstable ground. I'm not the one causing the earthquake. I'm just the one pointing out the cracks before it all comes down." I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to my family's drama. I was directing it. I was the quiet architect, and I was about to unveil a new design for all of our lives, whether they were ready for it or not. The foundation of lies was about to be replaced by a foundation of truth, and I would be the only one left standing on solid ground. The day I chose to set my plan in motion was a crisp autumn Saturday. I started with my father, Thomas. I sent him a single, unemotional text. "I have information you need to see. I will be at your house at 2 p.m. We need to talk alone." He replied instantly, "I'll be here." When I arrived, he opened the door before I could even ring the bell. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight, and his face was etched with lines of stress and sleepless nights. He looked older than 58. He looked defeated. "Heather," he said, his voice thick with a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Thank you for coming." We sat in his study, the very room where I had uncovered the truth. The silence was heavy. "You've been ignoring me," he began, a note of accusation in his voice. "I've been recovering," I said coolly, "from my car accident and from your text message. You didn't call for a week when I was in the hospital, but you called 53 times when you needed something. We're not going to pretend that didn't happen." He flinched, looking down at his hands. I was in shock. Sophia told me. She confessed everything. I didn't know how to process it. "She didn't confess everything," I said, sliding a folder across the polished oak desk. "She told you a version of the story that would make her look like a victim. This is the truth." He opened the folder. Inside were the copies: the letter from Italy, the financial statements detailing the cash withdrawals, pages from his own journals where he'd unknowingly documented his own misery. He read the letter from Sophia to her friend, his face turning pale, then ashen. The calculated, cold-hearted nature of the deception, laid out in his wife's own handwriting, was a physical blow. He read for nearly 20 minutes, the only sound in the room the rustle of paper. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with a profound, shattered horror. "She planned it," he whispered. "This whole time, she planned it." "Yes," I said. "And she's been paying for her silence, or his, for years. Those withdrawals line up with Jasper's birthday every single year." He slumped back in his chair, a broken man. I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by years of neglect. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice weak. "You hire a lawyer," I said, sliding Ms. Davis's business card across the desk. "You file for divorce on grounds of fraud. You fight for the assets you earned, which she has been using to fund her lie. You stop being a victim and you start taking control of your life. That's what I'm doing." He stared at me, seeing me for the first time not as his quiet daughter, but as someone else entirely. "You did all this." "I did what you should have done years ago," I replied. "I looked for the truth." I left him there, sitting amidst the ruins of his marriage, the evidence of his stolen life spread out before him. My next stop was Jasper. I found him at an open house for a ridiculously expensive condo downtown. He was in his element, schmoozing with potential buyers, his perfect smile firmly in place. He looked surprised, and then annoyed to see me. "Heather, what are you doing here?" he said, pulling me aside. "This is for clients." "We need to talk," I said, my voice low and even. "It's about Dad, and your real father." The smile vanished from his face. "What are you talking about?" "Let's go somewhere private," I said. We ended up in his gleaming, overpriced car. The new car smell was suffocating. "Spit it out," he snapped. "I have work to do." I didn't waste time. I simply handed him a single sheet of paper. It was a copy of Sophia's letter. He snatched it from my hand and began to read. I watched his expression shift from annoyance to confusion, then to disbelief, and finally to a panicked, sickening realization. The color drained from his face. "This is a joke," he stammered, his voice losing its confident swagger. "You fake this." "I didn't," I said calmly. "Mom went to Italy. She met an artist named Marco Rinaldi. 9 months later you were born, Dad knows. He found out last week. That's why he's been acting so strange. He's not your father, Jasper." He stared at me, his eyes wide with horror. For the first time in his life, Jasper was speechless. The foundation of his entire identity, the golden son of the successful architect, had just been obliterated. "Why are you doing this?" he finally whispered, the paper trembling in his hand. "Because the truth was demanded," I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. "You posted a picture celebrating my absence while I was in the hospital after a car crash. You called me negativity. You have spent your entire life benefiting from a lie that cast me aside. The peace and quiet is over. Welcome to reality." I got out of the car, leaving him to grapple with the fact that he was a stranger in his own family. The great Jasper, the dealmaker, had just been confronted with a truth he couldn't spin. My final confrontation was with my mother. I went back to the house. She was home from the gallery, and I found her in the living room, arranging flowers in a vase, the picture of domestic tranquility. "Heather," she said, her voice tight, "your father is in his study and won't speak to me. Jasper just called me, screaming hysterically. What did you do?" "I told them the truth," I said, standing in the doorway. "The one you hid for 28 years. Her face hardened, her mask of civility cracking. "You have no right." "No right?" My voice rose, the icy calm finally breaking. "You built this family on a lie. You let me grow up feeling like an outsider in my own home, all to protect your dirty secret. UW. Atched Dad pour his love and resources into a child that wasn't his, while his own daughter was right here, starving for a crumb of his attention. And you let it happen. You orchestrated it." "I did it to protect my son," she cried. "He's not your son to protect in this family," I shot back. "He is Marco Rinaldi's son. You committed fraud. You lied to your husband, to your children, to everyone. You don't get to play the victim here." I placed another folder on the coffee table. "This is for you. It's a photo of Marco, your artist from Florence. He lives in Montreal. He has a wife and 2 daughters who have no idea their father has a secret son in another country. I wonder how they would feel if they knew." The blood drained from her face. She looked at the picture, then back at me, her eyes filled with pure hatred. "You wouldn't," she breathed. "Don't test me," I said, my voice dropping to a steely whisper. "You will give Dad the divorce he wants. You will not fight him on the assets. You will walk away from this with nothing but the clothes on your back, because you deserve nothing. This perfect life you built, it's over. You are not a mother. You are a con artist." I turned and walked out of that house for the last time, the sound of a vase shattering against the wall behind me. The truth, finally, had been heard, and it was louder than any of them could have imagined. The aftermath of the truth was not a single explosion, but a series of controlled demolitions that reshaped our entire family landscape. In the months that followed, the perfect portrait my mother had so carefully curated was torn to shreds, and we were all left to pick up the pieces or to walk away from the debris entirely. My father, Thomas, took my advice. He hired Ms. Davis, and the divorce proceedings began immediately. Armed with the irrefutable evidence of Sophia's decades-long fraud, his legal position was ironclad. My mother, faced with the threat of having her affair and its consequences exposed not only in court but potentially to Marco's family, crumbled. She didn't fight. She signed the papers, giving my father the house, the majority of their assets, and what was left of his dignity. The last I heard, she had moved into a small, rented apartment on the other side of the city. The art gallery, where she had reigned as a queen of culture and taste, let her go. Her perfect life, built on lies, had evaporated into thin air. She tried to contact me several times, leaving tearful, manipulative voicemails, but I never responded. Her chapter in my life was closed. Jasper's fallout was perhaps the most spectacular. The revelation of his paternity shattered his sense of self. His entire identity was built on being Thomas's son, the heir to a legacy of success and status. Without that, he was adrift. His work suffered as he became erratic and angry. His charm, once his greatest asset, curdled into a bitter resentment that clients and colleagues could no longer ignore. He lost his job at the high-end real estate firm. He tried to confront my father, demanding support, but my father, finally seeing him clearly as the symbol of Sophia's betrayal, refused. "You are not my son," was all he said before closing the door on him. Out of a strange mix of desperation and rage, Jasper decided to contact his biological father, Marco Rinaldi. I don't know what he expected, a welcoming embrace, a new inheritance perhaps, but the reality was far crueler. Marco, confronted with this ghost from his past, denied everything. He had a family, a reputation to protect. He accused Jasper of being a fraud and threatened legal action if he ever contacted him again. Jasper, the golden child who had always been wanted, was now rejected by both the father who raised him and the one who created him. He was truly alone, a man without a name, and the last I heard, he was struggling, moving from one low-paying job to another, his arrogance replaced by a hollow bitterness. I never felt a shred of pity for him. He had reaped what he had sown. As for my father and me, our relationship was the most complicated piece to rebuild. After the divorce was finalized, he asked me to dinner. We met at a quiet restaurant, the first time we had seen each other since that day in his study. He looked like a different man, still weary, but with a clarity in his eyes I'd never seen before. "I owe you an apology, Heather," he began, his voice heavy with sincerity. "Not just for the last few months, but for your entire life. I was blind. I let Sophia's influence and my own insecurities poison this family. I focused on the son I thought I was supposed to have, and I neglected the incredible daughter I was lucky enough to have. I failed you, and I am so sorry." Tears welled in his eyes, and for the first time, I saw genuine remorse, not self-pity. It was the apology I had waited 26 years to hear. "I know I can't undo the past," he continued, "but I would like a chance to build a fudu. Ray, to get to know my daughter, my real daughter." It wasn't an easy road. Years of hurt and neglect don't vanish overnight, but we started slowly. We had dinner once a week. He would ask me about my work, about data analytics, and he would actually listen, his interest genuine. He told me stories about his own life, his passions, his regrets. I learned more about my father in those few months than I had in the preceding 2 decades. We were two strangers, related by blood, learning to be a family for the first time. The bond we were forging was tentative but real, built not on obligation or lies, but on a shared desire for a true connection. Today, my life is quiet, but it is my own. I excelled at my job, and my apartment no longer feels like a sanctuary for my family, but simply a home. Lauren remains my closest confidant, the sister of my heart. My father and I are still building our bridge, one honest conversation at a time. The house of cards my mother built has fallen, and the wind has scattered its pieces. I could have tried to glue them back together, to salvage some semblance of the family I once knew. But I realized some things aren't meant to be fixed. They are meant to be cleared away to make room for something new, something real.